Hi everyone, we just want to say thank you so much for coming out tonight. This is a very important issue that we all should be educated on, that we all should learn some more information about to see what our choices are and why certain choices may be better for us or for each as a community also. But I want to thank everybody for coming tonight and spending some time to learn about this.
Good evening. Thank you all very much for coming. It means a lot that you're all here and willing to give your time to making an informed decision about something that's very important to the life of our community. You know, it's very important to keep in mind the decision that's made during this election cycle about our form of government is a decision that will be with us for many, many years, decades, and beyond. So making a good, sound decision now is imperative, because at the end of the day, I know you all, and I know me, and I know all of our colleagues here. I work hard for the money that I have, and I want my property taxes to be treated with respect, and I want our property taxes to be treated in a way that honors the wishes and desires of our community. I also want to see all of us enjoy prosperity through increased property values. And these are things that are very important considerations when we think about the form of government that could be selected. So thank you all very, very much for coming. Thank you for your interest in this. It's wonderful to see you all. And I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Jason Grant. Dr. Grant is the Director of Advocacy at the International City County Management Association, and is incredibly knowledgeable and an expert in understanding forms of government and the impact different forms of government has not only on community leadership, but residents as well. So thank you, and Dr. Grant, I'd like to turn this over to you. And Dr. Grant is joining us from Washington, D.C. and just got introduced.
Great, so again, Jason Grant with the International City County Management Association. ICMA for short, so I'll refer to it as ICMA. It's a lot easier to say than the whole thing. So ICMA is focused on, we have about 15,000 to 16,000 members, and our members are both village, cities, counties, towns, all municipality managers, department heads, executives, and also the county level. So our focus is on local government. And local government administration. So our focus is how do we help improve local government? What are the best practices in local government? What's the best way to do county and city management as we go through it? So a lot of the stuff that we look at, we do research, we investigate, we talk through, find best practices, find what works and doesn't work, in order to offer guidance to how we best run local government. So I'm going to take a really high level on a lot of this stuff, and we can dig into some of the weeds here specifically as well. But just to help you understand, what are these distinctions of forms of government? Why do these form of government things happen? I go around and talk to places about how do they shape their city charter, how do they have better relationships and community engagement, what are some forms of government that work, how do they improve the form of government. At the end of the day, you all have to decide what's the best form of government for you and what gives you the best opportunities for the types of outcomes that you're looking for. First thing I'll talk about to help understand within a U.S. context, biggest thing for people to understand as we move through on forms of government, we have, our Constitution only has two forms of government, federal and state, right? So we have a federalist system that only references federal government, state government. There is no local government under our U.S. Constitution. It doesn't exist. So when we look at why are forms of government so different, why is it different from state to state, is because our U.S. Constitution doesn't dictate it. What happens is you go down to the state level, and your state code and state constitutions, that's what's going to determine what are the local governments here in Illinois. So I'll talk a lot about, and I'll try to keep it specific to the managerial versus president trustee. You'll hear me talk about often, it is referred to broadly as council manager versus mayor council. That's how it's generally referred to. But each state has their own ways of doing things, and they call them different things. So here you're looking at the distinction between the managerial form of government and the president trustee form of government. All right. And so you can look to the state constitution and say, why is it structured this way? Illinois state code stipulates what those are. You used to be a president-trustee structure. You then adopted at one point the managerial form of government. So the ballot question is asking, based on state code, do you want to retain the form of government that you have, which is the managerial form of government, right? So you have to say, yes, we want to retain it, or no, we do not wish to retain it. If you say yes, you keep the form of government you have, which is often referred to as council manager, or if you use called managerial, the retaining. If you were to vote no, the way that the state code stipulates is it reverts back to whatever you were before, which is that president-trustee, which is why they're not asking the specific question of do you want the form of government to revert to, because it just automatically reverts. So it sort of forces you to say we want to keep this form of government if you want the form of government to be here. So I know there's a lot of questions that come up with, why is it framed this way? Who did that? State code stipulates how to do it. And again, it makes sense if one introduces and wants to change the form of government. They could say we want to abandon and have a question that says we want to adopt another form of government, stipulate that. They could do that, but it's easier to say, here's the way we want to vote. What I find, I'm not sure how it got to the ballot here, what I find nationally, what generally occurs, when someone wants to change a form of government, they're going to introduce it in the way that's most favorable to get the outcome they want, right? So it makes more sense. Usually you'll see on the ballot, I don't know if you have other issues on the ballot, usually what you do politically is they say, what are the other things that we can bring people out? Is they're going to come out around this issue, we're going to vote on this? Or how do we frame it to make it easy that people are going to vote the way we want? So in this case, you have a no. If you want to change the form of government, your vote would be no, so it has to be retained, right? So if you're looking to do that, sometimes what you'll find is there'll be other items, it would make sense to put other items that are no, right? Because then if you say no, that's easier than saying no, yes, no, trying to figure those out. I don't know if that's here. I think I've seen signs saying vote no on all initiatives. My gut is a lot of the 2 or 3 of those, whatever number of initiatives you have. Generally what I see nationally is they agree with all of them, and this other one that's on there is the one that's most controversial. So that maybe what you're finding, I see a lot of heads nodding, so maybe here, right? That's not abnormal, it's not unusual. That's politics that makes sense, right? Like if someone's trying to change it, how do I make sure I get the votes you want? Also the thing that'll come up is, why is it a midterm? Why not a normal election? So you're in April. Again, that's usually what is viewed as most favorable, right? So voter turnout becomes really important. And I bring that up because a lot of times within the local government context, we got to figure out how do we make certain we get voter turnout. So that you all are here to become informed, what is this, to figure out whatever opinion you make. And I'm not here to say you should vote one way and vote a different way. I'm going to say any form of government can work and any form of government can fail. It's the people that make a difference in terms of whether or not government is effective in achieving the needs of the community. But the form of government can give you better or worse likelihood of achieving those types of outcomes that you're seeking. So I'm going to talk about some of those so you understand what's really the distinction, and then you can say, well, this is what I want government to be. Which form of government might be the best opportunity to reach the types of outcomes you may be looking for. So here on understanding government, what you'll find at the local level versus state and federal, there's no uniform structure. And I talked about that because of our federalist system, right? It is different from state to state. Even within the state, each village will have their own forms of government, what works for them. It becomes confusing, particularly people outside of the U.S. context becomes really confusing. But as you look at it, there is no uniform structure. There's a higher degree of professionalism within local government. Usually you need people who know what the heck they're doing in these things, right? They have experience running public utilities. They understand road infrastructure. They understand land use and the implications of those land use. They understand water preservation, right? Like all these things you need to do, you have direct impact from your local government. You see the parks, you see the roads, you're driving on them, you see people in the grocery store, all this affects you directly. So there's a lot more need for people who know what they're doing in local government, as opposed to simply political or visionary type of things. You need to see that income directly affecting you. You usually have to respond to immediate needs. And so the issues, when we look at these forms of government, how do you get better professionalism? How do you make sure that it's more responsive? And then always understand it is a child of the state constitutions, the state codes, they stipulate what you can do or not as a locality, right? So just being clear, some of the questions that come up a lot is why is it this way? Sometimes it's the state code, and it just is what it is. One thing that comes up is about forms of government. What are the different forms of government? I listed all the primary ones that are here, but what you'll notice is on the first two, it's council manager and mayor council. And again, council manager is what you have currently. The managerial form of government is a type of council manager structure. Mayor council is what you would revert to. The president trustee is a type of mayor council structure. Those are the two primary forms of government you're going to find in the U.S. Council manager is the most prominent, but again, pretty close, right? Like, so again, you're going to find one of these two. And I've been with ICMA for 5 years. Before that, I was in county government for 16 years. But as we look at this, in the 5 years I've been here and going back for the past 10 years, I've never once seen a community try to change to any of these other three. They're always debating a change to one of the other two. So from commission to council manager or mayor council, or from mayor council to council manager, mayor council. Always those are the two that really matter. And there's hybridizations of these as well. But then just so you know, you're debating the common ones. I'm not going to go through this entire timeline for you. It's there if you really want to geek out and get nerdy on it, cool. But as we look at it, what I think becomes important, down at the bottom here, and it's kind of blurry on there, but we started out in the U.S. with direct democracy. We had what's called town meeting and then representative town meeting. That's mostly in New England, right? Colonies came in, people were there. They had one issue: do you want to hire a sheriff or not? Do we want to have a roadway through here or not? They would all meet at the church usually. They'd all vote, and they would all go away, right? That's pretty much, those are the town meetings. All the people in town came together, decided what they were going to do, and then it happens and all goes away. Once we started growing and becoming too big, too complex, couldn't fit everybody into one building, people had a lot more going on in their lives to even know or care what was happening, so they start to move to this representative types of government to make sure we have a representative democracy, Republican, lowercase r type of structure of government, right? So we represented types of democracy. You see this mayor council come up, and mayor council came to mimic what happens at our federal and state levels, right? You have separation of powers, the executive and legislative body, and the mayor council, which is what the president trustee would be. You separate those. Now the executive is power of one elected official, and in the council, the board of trustees, they're representative of the legislative function of government, right? So you mimic it. And then they realized, oh my gosh, this does not allow us to do things very effectively because we have to debate over here what we might do, and that may be different than what the mayor wants to do, and then how do we actually get stuff done? And so they came up with this commission form out of Galveston, Texas, big hurricane. It destroys the entire town. Nobody can figure out what to do. So they say, we're just going to use all the executive and legislative powers to the one elected body, which is the commission. And you get all of that. And then they divided the divisions of government, so each department to different elected people, right? Then they said, wow, that's really efficient. We move things quickly. But it's not, or it's effective, not efficient, because now each departments are run by a different elected official, and we're just not very good at what we're doing, and we're wasting a lot of money, we're duplicating services across divisions. And then so South Virginia, in the turn of the 20th century, they said, hey, let's add a manager. Just like, think about it like you run a business. You got a board, that board is going to hire a CEO. That CEO is responsible for accomplishing the needs of the board for a company, right? And that's how they decided to look at government. And then, and all the corruption issues that are happening, so you can Tammany Hall, think of like Chicago, New York, and Boston, and all the corruption in the government, and the boss politics types of structures, where here's a slate of candidates, all those candidates are gonna run. If you wanna run, you gotta come kiss the ring, and you gotta pay your money and do these things. And then so they realized this council manager structure is a way to break that up. So they maintain the executive and legislative powers in one body, but what they did is said, you are going to hire and grant authority to a manager to figure out how do you achieve the vision that you all want. And it's going to be more efficient, it's going to be more effective. It's somebody who knows what they're doing, they've run cities, they're going to make sure they do this well, but you maintain the power and both the executive and legislative function into one body instead of separating it out. Because in local communities, we're small enough, we know what's going on. I shouldn't have to figure out, let me go to a public hearing over here, but I got to know the mayor to get in the mayor's office to actually make anything happen when it comes to the administration of government. So that's sort of just really big, fast timeline of how do we even get to this structures of government, right? And that's sort of the debates that we're still in today. I broke this up. A lot of people ask me, well, what about like based on population? Does it matter? And so I went through and looked at what are the forms of government by population. Generally, if you're under 5,000, they generally have a mayor-council form of government, right? So what we refer to. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Like, if I've got one stoplight and not a whole lot going on and just a few people here and not very complex government, I probably don't need to hire someone in addition to try to do this job. There's not a lot that that government is doing to have to worry about it. But once you get to that 5,000 range, it starts to shift. And that shift usually comes from the elected body. The elected body's like, we got a lot more people, a lot more complex issues and stuff I have no idea about. And I can only get elected through the population base here, and we got a full-time job and aren't sure exactly how to run this. They're usually looking for someone who, that's their job. I can hire you and hold you accountable to make sure you achieve this and give us good direction and guidance, right? And so you'll see that from 5,000 up to 250,000. Once you hit that 250 to 500,000 range, it balances back out and it's an even split. And then once you hit 500,000 to $1 million, it starts to switch back to mayor-council. Again, the reason why is it makes sense. Under a mayor-council structure, that mayor gets elected in a large city, has greater name recognition, now can run for Congress or statewide office. The parties are able then to say, let's vet a candidate and see if they can win this large population base, and then they can do that. That candidate's probably a strong candidate for a larger office that we may need. So partisan politics come in a lot as you hit that bigger need, and so there's a desire. It shifts now the political party who first says, hey, we need professionals to help run this. There's a tendency to say there's a greater opportunity for me to increase my opportunities within politics, right? So you see that shift. I'm going to pause because I talk fast, I know, and a lot. Does that make sense? Any questions? Anybody cool with that? Good. All right. Cool. So, in either form of these, right now, they both fill the role of the CEO. It's the chief executive officer of the government as a body that's charged with delivering programs and services to the community. And so under the administration, right now, the manager is the CEO. If it changes, the president becomes the CEO. But they're not the same. A lot of people just equivocate it and say, oh, well, I'd rather have an elected CEO than an unelected CEO. But they have very different powers that are granted to them. It's important to understand what those powers are. Right, so we talk about department heads. A manager hires and fires department heads based on their professional qualifications and has to fire based on cause. Can't just fire me because I don't like you, right? A mayor or CEO hires and fires department heads as at-will positions. An at-will position means you work for me because I say you work for me. If I want you to work for me, guess what? You don't work for me. Then you can't say anything about it. And so often what happens, a good mayor, CEO, president in this structure, would hire people based on professional qualifications, make sure they're there, and it runs normally. The form of government does not require it though. So what you could have in the future is a president who says, and you'll see this in a lot of places, who are my biggest political donors? Who are the people that are loyal to me? Guess who's going to get the department head jobs, which are the highest paid jobs, right? That's what a corrupt type of mayor or president can do, and the form of government allows for that. There's nothing illegal about that. They hire in, at will, the people that they feel most comfortable to accomplish the job. Again, it's the people, not the forms of government, that make government work or not. The form of government gives you parameters and boundaries to say, is this going to work? What are the risks that we're willing to take for this, right? And so, very different in how they hire department heads. A manager or CEO has to ensure effective and efficient operational government to achieve the council goals and objectives. The role of a manager is not to figure out what are the goals and objectives of the city or the village. Their job is to ask the council, the board of trustees, what's your vision? What are you trying to achieve? And then the manager says, okay, I can help you how to get there. Right? So it's never the manager's fault if the land use wasn't adopted the way they wanted and they implemented that land use perfectly. They did what they're supposed to do. It's that board of trustees. If you don't like the land use, they're the ones who determine what that vision is going to look like and how that land use is there. The manager says, okay, if that's what you want, here's how we would lay that out, here's how we would move to that direction. They carry out the will of the council, not their own individual will. The mayor, their job is to ensure the operation of government achieves goals and objectives of the mayor. If the mayor disagrees with, or the president disagrees with the board of trustees, one, they can veto, but two, they also can say, I can still play this. Okay, what are you gonna do? Fire me because I'm not really achieving the goals the way you want? It's not as effectively run as you'd like it to be? Guess what? I got elected as the mayor. I'm gonna do what I think the people like me to do, and it may be different with the board of trustees, and I don't care. Now you have a super majority of the board of trustees to try to push that, right? So there is a very different focus on whose goals they're trying to accomplish. The manager CEO offers policy recommendation that requests the council but has no power to overturn or solicit public influence. A manager should never be going out and saying, you need to go out and show up to this meeting and tell them to vote this way. It's not the role of a manager, right? The role of a manager is to say, here's the facts, here's the information, this is why we're making a recommendation that we make. If the board says, hey, we want to figure out a better way to do refuse collection, how might we do that? Okay, manager should be able to give a recommendation. They don't have to accept it. They can say, I hear you, but I'm going to do something different. Or they say, that sounds great, let's move forward. Whatever decision they make, the manager carries that out. The mayor or the president as a CEO, they will make policy recommendations to council whether they want it or not. They're going to say, here's what I want you to do. They're going to push that out. They're also going to campaign, because they're still political figures. They're going to go out and use their political apparatus to try to put pressure on the board of trustees to make sure that the votes and the decisions are what they want to be. That's the role of a mayor in their elected capacity that the manager doesn't have. The other issue is a manager or CEO can be removed at any time by a simple majority vote of council. If the majority of council says, we don't want you doing this, they can fire you, right? Now usually there's a contract and a stipulation if it's for cause or not for cause, and what does that look like? But they have that power. Remember, they maintain the executive power to fire that manager. And if you have a manager who's not doing the job that they're asking to do, not saying, I want you to do something shady and you don't do that. I'm saying, you need to accomplish this goal and the goals are not being accomplished. Just like any of us in our job, if we're failing to accomplish the goals of our position, we're going to be fired. We know that. The manager is in the same position. Under the mayor council, that's not the case. They are elected into that position. If they're not good at doing their job and they're not meeting the needs of the people, you generally, in most places, it's a 4-year term. Is it a 4-year term? Yes. So your 4-year term, you can wait 4 years to try to get them out of the voting box, right? If you have a recall structure, then you can try to go through the recall process. But again, it's a voting process. You can't just fire them because they're not effective, right? Even a majority of council who represents the people felt that way. The last issue is that the manager is obligated to fully and faithfully administer government to achieve the adopted goals of the council. The mayor has no such requirement to achieve adopted goals of the council, right? So just be clear. So they both have the title of CEO. They both are responsible for running the daily operation of government. Totally different powers and totally different ways in which they go about doing that by the structure of government. So I'll pause on that. Is that?
Well, and they also have unique qualifications to be in the positions that they're in, right? Elected versus educational, higher educational, superior management, anything that they would have qualifications for.
Yeah, so when we talk on qualifications, a mayor wins because they can run a campaign effectively.
Right.
A manager gets hired because they can run a city effectively.
Right.
Two different things that you're doing, right? And again, a good mayor can run a campaign and be good at hiring the right people. But the form of government, there's no requirement that you have any kind of ability to do it. Under the council manager form of government, and to be fair, if you were to have a mayor and or in this case a president and board of trustees decided that they want to all collectively appoint and hire anybody they want and not hire based on qualifications, they can do that. But the form of government is harder because you have to have all those people and the people not care that they're not hiring capable people into that position, right? So it can happen, but it requires a lot more collaboration. You have to have a majority of that board of trustees, which includes the president within that, to want to say, we don't care, it's all going to be political gamesmanship, and we're just going to run this. They all have to be in agreement on that. And then whoever they hire as manager also has to be complicit into that. That's a lot of people you have to get there. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, it does. But the people can often see that happening, and then you can say, we need to maybe make a change in terms of who gets elected, right? So there's powers that people have to make that change, but the form of government gives you a greater chance of not having that type of thing occur. So, good point. So the other question that comes up a lot is around what's the role of the village president within these two. Often the elected, if your president wants to have a shift in the form of government, if the mayor wants to have the shift, it often comes around, I want or need more power and authority to make things happen. I don't have enough power or authority in my current capacity under this form of government, currently the managerial form of government, to really make it happen, right? And so if you look at it, in blue there at the top, it's all the same. Nothing is really different. They both advance a vision for the city. They both serve as official spokesperson. They both serve as ceremonial head. They both meet with constituents. They both identify solutions to citywide problems, and they both develop policy recommendations for the board to consider. All of that happens regardless of your form of government. That's the role of that president either way. What becomes different is under the managerial government that you currently have, the president sets the council agenda and runs and oversees all board meetings, and they vote on all items before the board. Under president trustee, the state code's a little bit different on some of these, so based on your size, it may not be exactly like this on here, but they run the daily operation of government, right? So on top of everything else, they have to run the daily operation of government, and they can veto board actions that they disagree with. That veto power is huge, right? Veto power means I don't only need a simple majority, I just need to make sure they don't have a supermajority. As long as they don't have 2/3, they can't do anything. I just need to keep a minority group on that with me in order to make sure I sink anything I don't want, and that usually tables any kind of discussion. So just understand that distinction there, that veto power is huge. And then you look at all the things it takes just politically, right, to constituent services, going out, looking at the city, all these things you have to do as a mayor as an elected position. Add on top of that the full-time job of running a city, right? That overextends generally that mayor. So I'll pause again. Any questions on that? Anything that comes up? Does that make sense? Does that resonate? Do y'all feel like, no, that's not really right? Yeah.
On a managerial style of government, the trustees set the raises for the manager. On the other form of government, who sets the raises or benefits for the president and CEO?
Yeah, so great question. So what will happen is under the president trustee structure, it is the president who is responsible for presenting the budget, and then the trustees to adopt the budget. And remember, with that veto power, what you can change or not from that mayor's budget presentation, they have a lot of power of what they put into there. Because it's an elected position based on state code, if they said, we want the mayor position to increase the salary to whatever it is, what happens is they have to approve that to the next election cycle. Elected officials aren't allowed to raise their own salaries while they're in the position. So what you'll normally see is, it'll be usually the end of the term. So if they're on a 4-year term, what you'll typically see is in the 3rd year, they say we want to raise the salary for the mayor, often the board of trustees as well, so they get on board with wanting to raise it. But they'll say we want to raise the mayor's salary because it is a lot of work. We need to raise it. They do that within the budget process. And then whoever runs for mayor the next time, they run under that new salary for that 4-year structure. That's usually the way that you'll see that work. Under the managerial form, it has to be a majority of the board of trustees in a majority say this is what the salary, and they can do that any year. Year to year, they can say, you know what, you've been doing a great job, we think we want to keep you, we're going to raise that. Or they can say, you know what, our budget, we need to cut this, if you don't like that, you can leave right in, that's the conversation that'll happen. But usually if you got a manager that you want, you figure out how do I keep them, what's the salary that makes sense, and if there's agreement, then you get to that as a contractual agreement generally. Does that answer? Yeah.
So just to be clear on what you just said, because I think that's what just happened here, that our board of trustees have approved, should we change our form of government, that they've already approved a large increase for the mayoral position, and they did that because there's an election coming now, so is that going to take place? Did I understand that?
So when is the next mayoral election? So then they probably would have structured the bill, someone could correct me if I'm wrong, generally what I see is they probably structured the bill that if the outcome is X, salary is Y. So So that way, whoever ran for mayor and who wins that mayoral election will, so in this case, if they tied the salary of the mayor to the no vote winning, which means you revert back to the president trustee, what they probably did, and y'all can correct me, right? They probably would have said, you're gonna get paid as the president this amount if the vote is yes and maintain it. It's gonna be this amount if the vote is no.
So that is accurate.
Okay, so then what that is whoever runs for mayor in this election cycle and wins, so is this one contested or
So
uncontested?
this one is uncontested.
Okay, so if it's uncontested, really easy.
Let me correct myself, there's a write-in.
There's a right.
There's a write-in.
Okay, so you have, write-ins can always occur, right? So as you look at, assuming that there's one person on the ballot and that person generally feels confident they're gonna win, and the write-in vote's a different type of campaign, right? So you look at, that president is looking at, if it is a no vote, the salary set for the president trustee structure is what they're gonna make. If it is a yes vote, then that salary is what they're gonna make under the current managerial form. And that's usually adopted in the budget. They probably stipulated what the board is gonna make and what the president's gonna make. That's usually what they do for all elected officials. So when everybody runs, you're running knowing what salary you're gonna be making. Is that? Yes. Okay, good. So, yeah.
It seems as though the veto authority really creates a locus of control or a consolidation of power that diminishes the voice of the trustees and therefore the voice of residents, because the residents no longer have that representation and have some kind of authority. Is that true?
Yeah, so if you think about it this way, under the current structure, the president and each trustee has an equal voice. They all vote one vote, right? It's one vote across the council. So even though in many places, and again, not sure exactly here, but generally, sometimes the chairman of a board or the president or the mayor, depending on how their title, often carries a lot of weight because they have larger political capital and sometimes they have other boards of trustees that follow their vision. So that'll happen. But there's still one vote. And so if that mayor is on an island and the majority of the board of trustees says we don't want to go that way, the mayor loses. They can't veto it. They lose that, right? So the form of government in the managerial form is to say all of you are equal because each of you represent the people equally, whether that's by district or voted at large. Whoever you were voted by, that electorate is there to serve the people and you have an equal voice. If you separate those powers, now they don't vote in every issue, depending on structures of government, how they kind of play out. But that veto power now says I have a stronger vote because now the simple majority. So if I'm in the minority by one vote, but I have veto power, well now I'm in the minority, but I win because you don't have enough votes to override that veto. So that's where it becomes challenging. And elected officials do not like to publicly lose. They're not generally going to bring any discussion up if they don't have the ability to win it. If the mayor's going to veto it, and I know the mayor's going to veto it, and I know I don't have the power, usually I'm not going to introduce that because that hurts me politically. Is now I stood against the majority, stood against the mayor, and now the people and that political apparatus may come after me politically to be like, oh, I'm probably going to get primary. I'm probably going to have someone run under my seat now because now I'm looking like I'm in, right? So you got to know you're going to win usually. So that veto power is not only does it have the ability to give more weight to the mayor, or the president in this case, it also has the potential and likelihood to sort of quash good discussion about issues that we never would even hear about because there's not confidence in government.
And that's the problem here, because there's never discussion, there is never an opposition by the Board of Trustees. They sit silent and let all of this go, and have refused to answer any questions regarding this proposed referendum that was orchestrated after they knew there was going to be opposition. So,
Okay. I mean, yeah, and understand within the form of, and this is why I said it's the people in government that make the biggest difference. Forms of government. So what you described, it is possible that a board of trustees doesn't really debate or discuss or shit like, but you've got to get all those people on board. And that's for the people. If the people feel uncomfortable with that, then people gotta figure out how to change that in terms of the people. I can talk to the form of government and say the form of government gives the opportunity to elect people to wanna have debate, deliberation, and discussion.
Overall.
Yeah.
I have a question. Is there a conflict of interest with a president who is running unopposed, not given the writing candidate, for him to go out and want to have people vote against the referendum? Is that normal? Do you normally see someone that is out there politicizing himself to vote a certain way?
Well, so is there a conflict with the president doing that? No, they're an elected
It
politician.
benefits him, I should have said it benefits him financially.
That's it. So I'll structure it this way. Politicians are there not only to hear what the needs of the community are, but to share that vision and get the community to say, yes, I believe in that vision. So as an elected official, one can ask, like, there's no legal requirements. The role is to go out and advocate for what they believe. If they believe that a no vote or a yes vote is the best for this community, it's absolutely the role of the president to go out and say, I think you should vote yes or no. It's for the electorate to determine whether or not they feel that's self-serving or that's problematic. But certainly it's the role of the president as an elected official to do that, which is different from a managerial form of government. With ICMA, we have a code of ethics. Our code of ethics, if we're an ICMA member, they may not go out and advocate. The manager could not go out as an ICMA member manager. Now, there's managers who aren't ICMA members, they don't buy into the code of ethics, but most are in that regard. It is ethically wrong to go out and advocate for a yes vote or a no vote, right? So if a manager in that position were out here saying, gee, I think you should vote yes, or you should vote no, they should never go out and say that. They would step back, they would let the folks who are running the political campaigns that are out there, they do that. And they let them do that. I will tell you, when I worked in local government, I never once voted in a primary. Because I didn't take partisan positions. And I didn't want people thinking I supported any partisan position. And my wife had one of her best friends run for a local office. And cannot put a sign out in front of my yard because that's going to look like I'm supporting someone. As a public servant, I can't do that. As an elected official, they can. And usually it'd be along party lines or whatever types of issues that they're backing. But the managers cannot, elected officials can. And that's one of the things that becomes important. How do you build public trust that we're making the best recommendation for the people versus ourselves? That's the distinction in the forms of government, for sure.
I have one more question from a legal standpoint in Illinois. Can you hold a town meeting to speak both sides, pros and cons of a referendum legally in Illinois? Do you know that?
Yeah, I'm not an attorney, yes. Do you want to speak to me to that? Me?
So it was.
No,
Right, they had posted something online that says legally they cannot hold a meeting, whether it's a town hall or open discussion, cannot do that. Is that true or is that false?
Okay, first of all, my name's Brad Townsend. I'm a former village manager and city manager, actually in Wooddale and in Shore Park. So one of your neighbors here. There can be public discussion, even at a regular meeting of the village board, about the referendum or any question about it. It's typically brought up during public comment. That's required to be public comment at a meeting, but it's the option of you as a citizen to go up there and say something about it. Now, they're not supposed to comment on your comment while you're up there. So, yes, it can come up as a topic, but you're not supposed to comment on it. They also are not supposed to use any resources of the city or village to be a proponent of yes or no either. They can't use dollars, or they can't use, they're not supposed to put it on the website or anything like that. So if they do it individually as a person, they have their own social media page or whatever, they can probably do that, but you gotta be careful about how they're doing that. And I'm not saying that they're doing it as an official of the village. So yes, conversation can come up at a regular meeting, a public meeting, officially of the village, but it's within those parameters.
But
And
there
I
would
don't
be,
know.
but there would be nothing wrong with the trustees as village president giving factual information and debating the proposition to go on the ballot, as opposed to no discussion, just putting the proposition on the ballot.
They can put factual information out, even on their website, saying that this referendum is coming up. In fact, I would recommend that any city or village do that, that this is coming up, at least the fact that it's coming up, the date that it's going to happen, and what the actual question is. Yes, that part can be put on there, as opposed to like adding on, oh, by the way, vote yes or no. You can't do that part, but you're absolutely right, Chris. You can have the basic information that this is coming up, and I don't know if it's happening here, but it could, it should.
Thanks, and ask Mike, Brad knows Illinois, he's been in here, so he can answer those more specific. Yes.
So when our village manager got fired, and we asked the question to the village president, and he gave us no answer to the community why he got fired. Everybody's, we're puzzled. During the holidays, guy gets fired. Was I a big fan of him? No. But why, as a community, we can't get an answer from our village president saying why Evan Summers got fired? And now we have a planning and development guy, Posgate, just walked out of town. Why can't we have answers from our village president, what's happening to our government? People that run our government.
So can we or do we? Can you? Yes, but again, generally what I was finding these is you'll usually get references to personnel matters. We don't comment on personnel matters. That's usually what most communities do. They're right. You don't get into specifics of personnel matters. You generally will not find a city manager that's going to talk about. They're going to look. We're looking for another job in the next city. Got fired. My time's up here. I'm looking for another job. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to talk ill of the community I came from. That doesn't look good for you in the long run. Sometimes you get fired, right? So they can put out certain information. They're not required to or obligated to by law. They do have the ability because it's a personnel matter. That is, from a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act perspective, that is one of the exemptions of Freedom of Information Act is personnel matters. So they're legally right that they don't have to put that out. Not necessarily the best community engagement part of it, if people want to know something, but legally you're allowed to do that. You have a question?
I did. I wanted to ask, and if either of you could talk to this, would it be construed as a conflict of interest for somebody to have, for example, an existing position as chief of police and now being appointed as a village manager and have the two roles at the same time?
So it is not abnormal if you, so what I'm hearing here, your manager was released, and then you generally will appoint an acting or an interim manager. That is normal. And that often will come from some sort of department head position. The police chief could be that. But often you'll see maybe the finance director, because they're in budget season, I need somebody who puts the budget together. Hey, finance director, you're on the budget anyway, you gotta present it, we don't have a manager, you're gonna be the interim manager until we hire a manager, right? So that is not abnormal at all for the board to say, and all of us have been there in our own jobs, right? Someone's gone and like, you gotta step up and pick up the slack. That's kind of the way that works, is who's capable of doing this in the interim capacity until we have a full-time manager. Usually that's because they're looking to do the hiring process and they go through it. It's gonna be, anywhere from a month to 6 months, however long it takes to find that person. And everybody's just pulling the oars together to try to keep things moving to you higher. So that is not abnormal. It's not a conflict of interest simply because they hold another position. Usually what that means, if it's a police chief, then usually the deputy's picking up some of the chief's duties and the lieutenant's picking up, right? So you can kind of figure all that out as you work it along. That's pretty normal. Hope that is the back.
Many of us have been told in support of this change that citizens of this town will have more say in what happens day to day in our town if we change to a mayoral council form. In your experience, where do the citizens' power lie with each one?
Yeah, so in which form of government might the people have more say in what occurs? Right? Yeah, so you look at the people elected their representatives. So when you say more say, on the administration of government, under your current structure, the voice you have is every policy decision that the board makes, you can show up to that public hearing, make your voice known, tell them what policy direction you would support or not, then they vote, and they adopt the policy decision. You have the chance to weigh in with your representatives on council. In the daily operation, you don't have a direct say into the daily operation because that's through the power of the Board of Trustees to say this is the vision we're adopting. You're able to say, look, these are the goals and outcomes, this is the vision you're saying, but I've got all these problems, the programs and services aren't being delivered well. You go to the Board of Trustees and says, this is a mess, nothing's working, it's not working, the village manager isn't doing the job they're doing, that's the issue you've got. They then can fire that manager because, hey, we're getting a lot of complaints about all this stuff and you're not fixing it. They also have the ability to say, hey, look, I'm getting complaints on this. You need to clean up the streets down on this road. You need to get over here because I'm getting a whole lot of complaints and I don't want to get a whole lot of complaints as a Board of Trustee member. They then put pressure onto that manager to say, you got to figure out how to address this. And if they don't, then they can fire. So that's where you have a say. It shifts a lot under the president trustee structure is you can have a lot of influence on the president if you are one that the president allows into the office. Because they don't have to be there at the board meetings, they don't have to come in and listen to it, and if you've gone to complain to the council says they want to do something, the mayor says, I don't care, wait 4 years and try to get another mayor. But they don't have to listen. So the say that you have now, if you are politically connected with the president and you say, hey look, I'm going to open a business down the road and I really need my permit to come in so I can open up on time. And then the president and you, we're buddies. We get that. I got you. Don't you worry. Hey, expedite this permit for me. Got it. Good. I got you. We're good. They can do that. So if you're connected, yes, you can have that kind of influence. Versus if I'm not, hey man, it's just in the pipeline. You got to wait your turn. And I know there's a jump ahead of you, but I don't know. I'll look into that. Right? So the reality is, it kind of depends what you're looking for and what you want government to do. If you want your government to be like, hey, if I can get the person that I'm politically aligned with, and I know I can get in front of that president, and they're going to move the levers of government in my favor without having to go through the board, in that structure, yes, the president trustee structure allows that type of government influence. The managerial form does not, because a manager should never be operating in that capacity. And then you've got to go through, though, your council to make those things work. So there are different types. Does that answer?
Yeah, I just have a follow-up. So you're saying that with the mayoral council form, the mayor or president does not have to be at the board meetings?
Generally, that's correct.
So in your opinion, does that make you more or less accountable?
That's for you to decide, right? I'm never going to say it is one or not. I would say you don't have the ability to get in front of that mayor to the same as you do in the other, if that matters. But that's for you all to decide on accountability. I would never say, again, any form can work or not, based on the people that are there. It's what does the structure allow for, and what are the risks we're taking and advantages that we gain on either form.
But potentially less access to the president.
Correct. All right. So here's some considerations that come up a lot in these types of discussions. One is the administration politics dichotomy, which basically says there's the administration and running of government, and there's politics, and they're totally separate. I don't think that dichotomy really exists. They kind of overlap a lot. They're sort of two sides of the same coin, right? But there's this idea of running government. There is the administration of government that we should be delivering the programs and services that solve the problems of the people. We should do that effectively. We should do it efficiently. We should do it fairly, right? Like there should be clear processes. It should be open and transparent. We know how government runs and operates. And then there's the politics. We got to get the vision. We got to get people on board with this stuff. We can't just do things as we feel like. We got to really hear what are the people's needs and are we addressing the needs of the people. And so as you start to look at if the administration becomes too heavily political, Now you have the risk of corruption. You're just saying, hey, why are we, you lose public trust because they don't know if you're doing this because this lines your pocket or this helps your other political interest, this helps your buddy, right? All that degrades the trust in local government if it becomes too political. And if it's not political enough, if it's just administration, we just do this job and this is what we do, and screw all you guys, we don't care. Like, that's problematic as well. You've got to listen to the elected body to say what is it that we need to accomplish and achieve. So there's influence on both, but you don't want undue political influence in the administration of government because you want to make sure that you can have trust in what government's doing and it's meeting those needs, right? But that's often a debate, is how much of this should be the politics of it. I want to elect the person that's running there. I don't want some unelected bureaucrat running this stuff, right? You'll hear those kind of debates a lot. And so we say, okay, what is it that we want though? What do we want to achieve? And how do we find that balance? So that's one of the questions that you've got to figure out. Accountability, which is kind of what's been addressed already a little bit. There's always a desire to hold the executive accountable. Who do I hold accountable and for what? If this form changes, you hold the mayor accountable, the president, for the daily operation of government. Of the current structure, you hold the manager accountable for the daily operation of government, but it's under a different pretense, right? Like, is the manager achieving the goals and the vision as established by the Board of Trustees? If you say, yeah, but I hate these vision and what this Board of Trustees wants, so I hate this manager because they're accomplishing all these goals. Well, the manager's doing the right thing. You need to change the people that are elected making the goals, right? And conversely, if you have accountability only at the ballot box, the value of that is you feel in and I voted and I got my person in office or not, right? There's a lot of value in that vote to get that person in there. But that's the only accountability you have. After that, you got to wait 4 more years, right? As opposed to be able to fire them if they're good effective. So how do you look?
Repeat that one more time. 4 years.
Yes, 4 years, because that's the election cycle. Accountability for the mayor as a failed CEO is at the ballot box only. And again, if you do a recall vote, that's a whole other process. Sometimes you can get it early if you go through recall. That's a whole other challenge to try to set up. But in general, every 4 years you hold them accountable versus every single day on the manager, right? That's the distinction as those go through. But to be fair, you don't get to vote for the manager. The people you voted for on the Board of Trustees in their majority choose that manager. That's what you're voting for, where that vote goes. Whether you want separate or unified powers. Right now, the legislative and executive are unified within the Board of Trustees. If you separate that out, the executive administration is separate from this legislative, so they just can move forward. Generally, people who like separate powers want expediency. Just get this done. Don't go through this whole deliberative process. Don't sit there and talk about it. Don't listen to a whole bunch of people show up and talk about what they want or don't want. Just get it done. It's expedient when you have that mayor-council structure. Usually the unified powers, the idea of the managerial form of government is you want it to be effective, right? What's working, what's not. Hear the lived experiences of different people. What are the things that are here so we're making a good decision and it's well thought out and reasoned, right? So often expediency versus efficient, the effectiveness of it is often what that debate is, whether you like them separate or unified. Yeah.
I just want to go back to the accountability. So in a managerial style of government, to me, there's more accountability because if he did something wrong, you could fire him and get another manager. Right. In the other form of government, if something happens, we have no choice but to wait until the next election.
That's correct. Yep. And again, whether you feel accountability or not, is usually the distinction that others make is the voting accountability. That's the distinction that you can say which one is more accountable.
For more accountability within our community, we want to keep the managerial style of government.
Correct.
Okay.
It seems that through these, this has been wonderfully educative. It does seem as though we have a real challenge in our community, and I suspect other places too. If our trustees are not engaged in discourse and dialogues in representing the residents, they're surrendering their capacity to do so. And the mayoral, the president trustee form of government simply emboldens a village president even further to say, these are my priorities, you will do as I say. There's no guardrails.
No checks and balances.
Yeah, and what I would say is, yes, I think that's correct. The structure of it is what matters, right? So to say it emboldens them, I think what it does is it gives them the ability, if that's the direction they want to move, right? Because it's not that, look, mayor councils can work, right? Managerial forms can fail, right? Anything can work or fail. Is what are the risks that we're taking on? And what does the form of government actually allow us to do? And what are we willing to do within those forms of government to try to create and have influence? So a good president under the president-trustee form would not be emboldened and feel like, oh, now I don't need to listen to the board, because they would. But they're not required to based on the form. So now you're rolling it up to, I hope I elect a person who wants to do this, versus who knows what I get in the future. They have the power under the different forms of government. So not necessarily emboldened to do it, but they're free to do that if they wish. Does that?
Yeah,
That's one of the, and it's a nuanced distinction, like, but I think it's important to understand how those operate.
That's the key thing is what you said, if it's a good president.
Right, and which is why when we come to, some of the issues, and I get this a lot, well, why does ICMA advocate for council manager over mayor council? And we have members in both. It's not that one's good, bad, right, wrong. And I'll get to some of the research. Council manager proves to function more to the end goals of what we want out of government. If research changed and all of a sudden the other one worked better, we would change with it. Like, we want good governance. And so we see that they both can work, and when they do, they follow the same types of things that the form of government requires out of managerial form of government. They do the things that you would hope to. So, corruption is a big one that comes up a lot. And it's really common in the past 5 years. This has come up even more. This issue, there's a lack of trust in government generally, federal, state, and now even more at the local level. And so how do we reduce corruption? That distrust in government makes people fear elected officials are corrupt, whether that's the bureaucratic part of government, whether that's the political part of government, or it's just all of government, right? And so you see a lot of these discussions come up, and then we want to try to figure out, how do I reduce corruption, right? Like, one option, just blow up government, get rid of all of government, we don't need government, and heck with it, right? And no one's going to go to that extreme. They usually recognize there's some value. Where we disagree is where that value and what they should do. But we look at and say, this is what government needs to be, so how do I make sure they're accomplishing these goals? And I'll get into in the research. And you look at research, and this is independent research, academic research out of UNC Chapel Hill. It's 57% less likely to have corruption convictions under council manager versus mayor council. So you look at both, where's their corruption convictions? 57% less likely out of the council manager. Right? So if corruption is a concern, council manager performs better. It just does. And research just shows that. And it makes sense because they have the capacity under the mayor council. The mayor gets to appoint all the department heads. Everybody works for the mayor. They're separate, so the board of trustees doesn't get to look at all the daily issues. All the department heads, they can keep all the numbers. So the ability to control all that in any organization, outside of government, look at any kind of corruption issues in any business, any organization, when one person has control and everybody under them maintains control, that's where corruption goes up. So you look at your fraud triangle and any kind of financial structures, access and ability to commit the fraud is the highest, right? So the form of government, again, if you have corrupt people that run for it, the form of government, mayor, council, increases the opportunity if one wants to do corruption. Managerial form, you have to have the whole board on board with that. You have to have all your department heads on that, and right? So it's, again, not that it can't happen. There's communities that the elected body just like, they're asleep at the wheel, they don't care, they're not looking, but the form of government is a lot harder in those two, which is why you see that distinction. Partisanship is a big issue, often that comes up in these, and I don't know how the politics are in here, but obviously we as society have become much more hyper-partisan, right? Like It's not even about policy, it's just red and blue, it's Republican, Democrat, and it's whichever one you're in, one's good, one's bad. Whichever camp you're in the good camp, and the other one's the evil people, right? That's generally how our society has structured itself. And so, form of government is not a partisan issue. And I would tell you, when I go around, what I find, communities that are heavily one party or the other generally have a whole lot of flavor. So if you're a Republican community, your Democrats are a moderate Republican. If you're a Democratic community, then your Republicans are moderate Democrats, because that's the only way they win, right? So you see a lot of these things. But what happens is you start to see they generally want to push for the mayor council. So I see this, whether it's in a deeply red district or a deeply blue district, it's often, if there's hyper-partisanship, they want a mayor council because they can't get through the deliberative process, all the things they want. So if I can just get my person elected, they'll do what I want. It's the only way I can get my stuff done, because I can't get it done by myself. And so the deliberative process has failed. Let me find a mayor who thinks like I do in my more extreme position that can't make its way through, whether that's extreme toward the right, extreme toward the left, or I'm in the moderate position and that's the extreme in my community. Wherever that falls, there's generally that interest. That's the only way they get their stuff accomplished. So a lot of times you start to see this rise up around political ideologies as well. Don't know if that's the case here, but I see that nationwide. That's sort of what occurs. The other issue is, which one gives me better representation? This kind of goes to the question that you had in the back, right? Like, well, if I elect the mayor, I get more representation on that vote versus this person who got appointed that nobody elected, right? Like, there's often that debate in that field of representation. And I was remind people, your representation is the people that are hiring the right person, right? If you believe I need someone with knowledge, skills, ability to actually run a city, to run the village, to run the government, I want that. I want someone who knows what the heck they're doing to make sure it's done well. Then I want the people that I elected to do a good job of hiring a good person or getting rid of them and finding the right person. That's the representation. It's not through the electorate. And I will say this, generally in mayor council, understand, and again, elections are a little bit different in different places now, especially because there's all different ways that people get elected. But as you get elected, what generally happens is the mayor is responsible to their voters, not the people. Right? And I say it this way. If I know in a community, here's my donor class, here's who shows up. This part of the community shows up, and anybody who's running any kind of politics. I know if I get 50% turnout from this community and 10% from that community, who's going to get everything they want? 50%. 10% ain't showing up to vote for me anyway. What do I care? The other one's going to show up to vote for me. That's where the money's coming from. That's where my votes are coming from. You get what you want. You don't vote for me anyway, so I don't care. I need to get these people happy to win. Right? So they have usually 50% plus one. Right, to make sure I win. That's who they serve. Managerial form of government, they serve the interest of all people in that these programs and services are delivered to these ends. And so here's how we deliver these programs and services regardless of the political interest. Does that make sense? So representation often comes up. How you view representation of what you think is better. I'll pause on that again, just any.
Recalls are possible in our local community,
In some places they are. Can you do recall elections here?
but I mean, our form of government is a recall.
That is based on states. I would have to look at that. We can look at that and see. I always bring it up because some communities, they allow recalls, some don't. And so I'm not sure where you guys fall. So generally I just say you got every 4 years because that's a given to anybody. If you have a recall, sometimes there's option. I just don't know what your legal structure is. How it works, we talk about how the way that this structure works. The hiring of staff becomes important. Under the managerial form of government, the elected body hires the manager hires the department heads hire the staff. If this is to fail and it shifts, then what you have is the mayor will hire the department heads, and then the department heads will hire their staff. And those, again, can be at will. They don't have to be based on experience or knowledge. Budget process, people get confused on. I think this becomes important. The manager, under your current form, recommends a budget to the Board of Trustees, usually through dialogue. So sometimes they're like, oh, they just rubber stamped it. If they do a good job, it kind of will look like that, because the manager would be talking to them, what are you trying to accomplish, what do you want to achieve, let me know all that. They're gonna structure a budget to reach their goals and outcomes, and they'll be like, hey, great job, you made all the goals and outcomes. Like that's kind of how it should work. But the reality is, they can turn the entire budget down, flip it over, and do whatever the heck they want to it, and the manager has to fully and faithfully execute that budget, whatever they adopted. The way it would work under the other structure is the mayor will usually negotiate with the people they need to get to a majority. So you have what, 6? 5 on that? Yeah, five board of trustee members? 6? Okay, so they gotta get to a vote of 4 people, 4 to 6, to win at any point in time, right? So the mayor's gotta get 3 more, so if I can get to 3 people, then cool. I'll negotiate with those 3 people to get what I want, my budget will get approved. Right, that's usually the way it'll work with mayor council. I just gotta get it approved, and it's gonna be how I want it to be. So if I can get those 3 people who align with me, the other people can get on board or not, really doesn't matter. I just need to know how to count to the majority, if I get to the majority, and that's a political structure of a budget under the president trustee versus the ministerial. We've talked about this research. This is important, and there's a lot of dense text here. I'll breeze through these bullets a bit. We talked a little bit here. Municipal governments with a higher concentration of powers tend to have more bureaucratized administrations. This is what's interesting. People think of the manager as this unelected bureaucrat. That's usually the pejorative that gets used, right? It's just unelected. It's just a bureaucracy that's in place. If you don't like bureaucracy, you do not want the mayor council structure of government. Why? Because the mayor has to do all their job of being a political candidate. They got to go out and talk to people. So how do they make sure government gets run? They create committees, they create commissions, they create groups to help make sure it goes through this other process. I ain't got time to deal with this, I'll stand up a committee. I don't have time to deal with this, I'll appoint this person, I even pay him a little bit to do this part for me, right? So we'll go through all these things to make sure that government gets run. And they have the power to do that because now the administrative power is theirs alone. They don't even need to get the board of trustees on board with it. They can run it how they want, and guess what? They can put together the budget to make sure it gets funded the way that they want. Right? So bureaucracies increase under mayor council structures, and when you just look at the research of where that bureaucracy lies. When we talk about bureaucracy, it's got to go through these particular different bureaus, different places, different desks in order to get things approved. Much more confusing for the people because now they got to figure out how they get there. Under managerial form, the manager is responsible for the administration of government, so you know where to go through. That always runs through that manager administrator to make sure it gets delivered. Mayor council cities are less likely to implement cost-saving strategies compared to municipalities with council manager form. Right? So we look at, we want more efficiency, we want to cut costs. Council manager, the managers generally, they keep their job and they can grow their career because they're efficient. There's never been a manager that's gone somewhere and said, hey, you should hire me, because when I was over there, our tax rates went up every single year, and I spent a ton of money. Right? Brad's never gotten hired on that sales pitch, right? So as we go through it, but when we say, yeah, I cut their cost 5%. Right? I was able to save money on here. I found cost savings measures. I saved us $1 million in this function by reimagining it. I worked with another community to get us grants and contract services that we can do to get this project in under budget, right? The manager's job is the ability to prove that they can save you money. That's one of the #1 things that any elected body looks for in a good manager, right? Mayor's got to get you to show up at the voting box. And sometimes that's saving money, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's spending money where you need it to be spent. Right? So we look at it, cost savings are greater. So if you want to save costs, council manager works better. Mayor council cities are more likely to offer ineffective financial incentives for economic development opportunities, which are linked to declines in population and economic base compared to financial incentives implemented council managers. So the financial incentives, right? So I'm going to give you a certain amount of money to come locate here. You want to expand your business, we're going to reduce your tax over here, or we're going to not charge you these fees, right? We're going to give you incentives to build your economic base. Managers have to do that to show return on investment. Again, managers in this is a professional job. They got to show the outcomes actually continue. Remember, they get fired any day, which means they could be tomorrow looking for another job. So they got to make sure all the economic incentives that they're doing actually make sense and show the types of economic incentives that the 2 things in economic development, jobs and investment. Do we get better investment? Do we get more jobs and the types of jobs that we want? The mayor in that can offer incentives for any reason that they feel is politically advantageous. Again, good mayors will do the same thing as a good manager, but they're not required to. And so if I have a buddy who wants to come in down the road and needs an incentive to do that, I can give that incentive over there. I can say, you know what, this type of industry will come in, it won't be a lot of jobs, but it'll look good for me because it's an election year, and I need to show that I brought some company in here during this election year. They can do that, right? It may not be a great incentive for the long-term benefit of the community, but it looks good right now, right? So they have that political influence is always on the mind of the mayor, so it makes sense that their economic development incentives that they may offer don't always pan out to the advantages compared to council manager. Budgetary solvency. Council manager, stronger budgetary solvency compared to mayor council. When we talk about budget solvency, a manager is going to say not just what's our budget this year, can we adopt it, but we're going to say you've got a capital project, you want a park, you want a road, you want a facility that's built. What's the maintenance cost going to be? What's the out years on that? How many people do we have to hire to keep that upkeep? What's the AC and electric going to be? Can we do that over a 5-year budget cycle? What's it look like? So yeah, you can afford to build it. Can you maintain it? Can you keep it up? And do you want to pay that amount of tax to keep that going? Because it's not just about today, it's about down the road, right? So you look at budget solvency, they're also going to be like, hey, we need more in reserves because if a tragedy happens, if we get hit by a killer storm and some flooding or anything occurs, we got no money to handle it. We're going to be sunk and we're going to hurt. We need some money reserved to make sure we're there. They're going to have fiscal responsibility as part of their budget structure. So the budget solvency is better. Council manager governments, they're more likely to have sophisticated revenue forecasting, expenditure analysis techniques, prepare multi-year budget, emphasize strategic planning and long-term policy priorities, realize efficiency gains, and have lower per capita costs on basic services, right? So we look at all these things that people say, this is what we want government to be. Council manager outperforms mayor council. So when you ask, why do we support that? Because we think those all kind of make sense, right? And again, that's because managers have to look long-term. They know they may not be here. They start projects, they finish projects for another elected board. That whole elected board may come in. They're still carrying on stuff from a previous elected board. They could leave, another manager comes in. It's always looking 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years down the road. I talked before, 57% less likely to have corruption convictions. Council governments are more likely to make economic development decisions based on strategic plan guidance. So they usually have a strategic plan and say, we're doing this project because this is what we want to look at down the road. This is what we're trying to be as a community versus what's politically expedient. Political influence of a mayor on a chief administrative officer. Sometimes people will have a mayor that still hires a city manager under the mayor. But even in those structures, they tend to have negative influence on the financial outcomes of local government. Financially, they don't perform as well. Municipalities headed by a city manager associated with increased bond ratings. So when you go through a bond rating capacity, so it's Fitch, AAA, and Moody's, they go through and say, this is your bond rating based upon, do you have good fiscal planning? Do you have good budget solvency? Have you looked at long-range plan? Do you think the revenues you have coming in are going to stay coming in, or are these you're relying on one business that's going to be gone tomorrow, right? They look at all of those and they rate your bond capacity to say you're likely to pay your debts and be fiscally sound. Higher under council manager than mayor council, right? So, and then the last one, council managers tend to be equipped with more advanced information systems. No one has ever won an election. You've never once voted for a mayor or trustee who says, I'm going to give you the best technology infrastructure, right? We're going to have good systems here. Like, that's not a winning campaign strategy. Managers need to have that in place. That creates efficiencies and makes sure there's security, it reduces risk, and makes sure that the government can run. It's not anything that's pretty. City managers are going to notice that, look at that, and say, we need to put this technology in place. Mayors may or may not, right? As you look at it, so that's why you see those. So that's all academic independent research. Not anyone who looked at it said, I need to find a way to make sure council manager wins. No, it's like, hey, here's questions. Which one works better? Because those are the, remember when I said at the beginning, there's 2 primary forms of government. So that's kind of where it goes through. They look at those 2. And every single time, the things that people say, reduce corruption, better budget solvency, better economic development opportunities, like all these things, council manager keeps coming out as performing better. The one area that mayor council performs better is higher voter turnout when a mayor runs. And again, it makes sense, because the only time you can hold them accountable is the election. So more people show up that one time to try to get their vote, because after 4 years, there's nothing else I can do. Right? But again, so if that's important, voter turnout, and that's the one primary thing, then yeah, that performs better in that way. So I'm going to pause because I know it is late running through. I want to make sure your questions are answered there. I got the more I can talk to. But any other questions that you all have? Yeah.
So say we switch over and we've got somebody who doesn't have the education as a manager will to the village on a day-to-day basis. I know what the response is going to be when people come and complain, and they'll just put it to the department heads, like the budget, maybe the finance director's problem. And so there's always an escape. And, you know, there's only so much that you can do with that kind of thing.
That's right. I mean, the people are limited to the people they elect, right? Whatever the people you elect choose to do and how they choose to operate, that's what you've elected. They represent you. Whether you feel fairly or unfairly that they're representing you, that's who's elected to do that. And I always say, the power is always to change who's representing you. But when we look at which form of government performs better, the question I'm always going to turn back is, which one do you feel is going to give you that best opportunity? Which one gives you better guardrails? Which one gives you better opportunity to make a difference? The key questions that I put up: should the CEO be accountable on a daily basis or once every 4 years, right? Should department heads be hired based on qualifications or based on political allegiance? Do organizations thrive with consistent and effective service or when there's mass turnover at department head levels? Remember, every time you get a new president, you're going to get all new department heads that person wants. No reason to keep them. And then I'll tell you from a staff perspective, nothing worse than having a boss that's like, this is what we're doing, 4 years, nope, we're doing this. 4 years later, nope, we're doing this. Your good staff are going to leave. They're going to go find somewhere where they can grow their career to the department head level, as opposed to being capped at an assistant director type level. So I want to get to the director level. I'm going to go to a community that I can do that. And I'm going to go somewhere where there's stability. And all of us would do that in our own job, right? We're going somewhere where stability. I know what's being asked. I got value up there, right? Do we place greater value on a CEO that has proven ability to run a city or proven ability to run a political campaign? Right? Where is your value? Is running a city a full-time job or a part-time activity? Remember, a mayor who's also an elected person and doing a full-time job as a city manager, that's 2 full-time jobs, right? So is this something that we do kind of part-time on the side of my political actions? So those are the questions I usually ask. And again, I'll go back. It's not a right or wrong. I'm not saying, like, I know people are like, oh, of course, he's heavily biased toward the council manager form of government. Like, I get that. But what I would say is take a look at the research. Show me where mayor council perform. I've shown you the research where council manager works better. That's why ICMA advocates for council manager form of government versus mayor council, because it performs better. But we also say in your community, you're going to do what's right for you. You will make the right choice because it's the choice that this community says, this is how I want my government to operate. And within that structure of government, how do we hope it operates the best? How do we let the right people into those structures of government? But you have before you the question to say, which form of government do I feel is going to allow us the best opportunities to have the outcomes we want? Neither one will guarantee, neither one an outcome one way or the other, right? Which form of government gives you the best? I wanted to make sure you have information to go on, data to go on, understand the national perspective. You're not alone in having this discussion. I go around the country and help people understand what are these distinctions. And we have members in both forms of government that operate in here. So again, any form of government can work. Any form of government can fail. It's the people that matter. The decision you have on form of government is which form of government gives me the best chance to have the outcomes I want for this community. And that's the most I can give an opportunity. So I'll leave it at that. Any other questions? Turn it back over.
So, Jason, summarizing everything you said to us tonight. If we want the least amount of corruption, if we want the most access to our elected officials, if we want, there's something else you said that I wanted to ask you about. If we want those things, and if we want, I forgot the third one, but all of those things are going to be with the managerial council, right? Because then we have more accountability
The managerial form of government gives you greater likelihood of having all those outcomes. And that's just based on the data, right? That is unequivocal.
Less corruption.
It seems to, oh, sorry.
You know what I mean? So, with there being no current manager now, in this election cycle, if we end up staying with the current form of government where the trustees and the president decide to who they decide to pick for that position, what's to stop them from voting one of themselves in or the president himself in there? Does that just become an ethical or a legal issue at that point?
So that's a great question. So the council in their majority has the power to hire who they believe is best fit for that position, for what their need is. Nothing prohibits the president, another board of trustee, any elected official can step down from that position and they could hire that person into the manager position.
So they would have to step down from said position. They couldn't do
Yeah, I don't think you can hold the elected position plus the manager position.
Yeah, so I can actually speak to that. There is a backup plan if this referendum fails, that there will be, I'm not gonna go on record, that there will be someone else that steps in to be president, the president will step down, he will become the village manager. That is plan B. As long as.
Well, that's no good either.
That just becomes unethical. At that point, everybody should see that as a red flag. You didn't get your way one way.
I have a question in regards to her comment. So if the mayor were to, or the president were to step down and be hired into the manager position, can the board appoint someone as president, or do we have to go back to the ballot box? I mean, isn't that an elected official?
I'm not certain on Illinois election law, but I don't know.
Okay, first of all, that scenario that you're talking about, of course, undermines what the whole purpose of the council manager format is in the statutes. Okay, so you're going against the statutes. And would someone have the ability to question that legally? That's a whole other question that I don't know. But as far as you're asking about what happens if one of the current elected officials, or the ones that are elected after April 1, steps down, are they required to step down and become the manager? And if they are, I think the answer to that is yes. I agree with Jason on that. And if they do, you're saying, okay, who then becomes the presiding officer? They can elect from among their own selves an acting presiding officer. It might be called pro tempore. I'm not really sure what the exact title is, but that's what happens. Even if and that's the same thing that happens even if the village president or mayor leaves office or dies in office, whatever. There is the acting, so they could do that. Now they still have a vacancy though on the board. That then, my understanding is they could select a replacement person to serve. Yes. Now that depends on the timing. So I think that if it's more than a couple of years beyond the next election, then it has to be up for election next time. If it's less than that, they can stay until that election's over. So yeah, they can do it. There's some movement there, but that goes against the law and the spirit of what's in the statutes for council manager in Illinois.
Yeah, and all of that sort of complicates the simple question in front of it, right? Like, the board, right now, from what I'm understanding, there's a vacant village manager position. If the yes vote prevails, they're gonna have to fill that position. To fill the manager position, the elected body does the search, does the hiring, does the firing. They determine what parameters they want to hire that person. So they can do that however they wish to hire that person. And then the people, they feel like they don't like whoever gets hired for whatever reason, usually that becomes political pressure on the board of trustees to say, hey, you need to change this, and if they don't, that usually prompts people to run against them, and that usually prompts a whole different type of issue to try to change them.
Two years later.
But for this.
For this immediate situation, they can appoint, yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna wrap up, because it's late, right? So I know we're running through a lot. I'll wrap it up here, but if you have any questions, I'm gonna hang around. Come up and ask me. Feel free. I don't know if y'all wanna say where to email, how to reach you.
Guys, if you think of any questions when you go home, you can reach out to any of us on Facebook or through our email. If you have questions after tonight, email them to us, message them to us. We will get them answered by Jason. There is a Facebook page. It's called Vote Yes Bensenville. If we receive questions and we get an answer from Jason, we will go happily post them there. So, because maybe somebody else has the same exact question. Okay, so I think, do you have anything else? Again, I want to thank everybody for coming. I know it was a lot of information to digest, but I think it was very important information because this is a very important decision. Okay?
And vote yes.
One last thing, thank you all for coming here tonight. Thank you.
So basically bullshit.